so I can be exact.
Yeah, and text it to me because
Because
I can like pull it up on screen too.
oh, all right, so let me just it's in here notifications, uh, and I'm sending it to you. Message. Intro. Bomb. Um, but it says, "Damn, Dave Chappelle. I hope you consider a different approach to your current social commentary. It's feeling joyless and lacking the enlightenment you used to inspire. I understand the idea of crossing the line, but there are many more subversive yet unifying ways to do so.
Okay. Wow.
It's
Yeah.
not. It's
Yeah.
there's
What do you
certain
think
words
about
I just don't even like. Joyless. It's like, okay, that's your interpretation, but it's not
that? Mhm.
mine. He
Yeah. Yeah.
seemed to be enjoying himself quite a lot to me, and lacking enlightenment.
Yeah. I think with in that one, in the SNL one, definitely. Like, I
And this is
don't know about some of the other ones though. Like
sure
some of the other ones, he looks super aggrieved.
that literally the closer. So for everything, whether you agree or disagree with his trans perspective in the
Yeah.
closer,
Yeah.
what I from my observation, that does appear joyless. It's not a matter, he's not doing that of joy. It feels like an
Mm.
obligation to a stance he's taken and explaining himself. Whatever. I'm not trying to get too deep into any of this.
Yeah.
What the point you made that I'm referring to is that like he says he understands the idea of crossing the line. But
Like, do
from
you?
my experience in comedy, like what is a punchline besides crossing the line?
Mm.
It's
Mm.
it's the thing
I
that
mean, besides it, or I mean, I think that's a good question. Um, Besides it, I think
especially
it
if you're
can
doing
be like,
social commentary.
yeah, I mean, you have to be doing some level of misdirection. Some like I think line crossing is one way of misdirecting. I think like the setup and the punchline, like you gotta misdirect. Like so that's what I see it as fundamentally. And line crossing is one method of so doing. You know.
And from studying hours and hours and hours and hours of stand up over the
Yeah.
last 2 years,
Yeah.
especially on social commentary,
Mhm.
I have not found a lot of other forms of misdirecting. It's so
Mm.
you start the setup is establishing how you're going to at the end say something that you can't say.
Mhm. Got
If
you.
I
Got
just said that thing, it would just be wrong. But
you.
I'm
Mm.
providing you a context in which I can say the thing I can't say and you
In
laugh.
social commentary comedy, you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I feel you on that. Because like if it's like absurdist, then you might just say something just very outlandish, right? Like it's a misdirection in that way. Um, but I do think it's social commentary. It's but you know what comes down it will come down to for me, since this is like a really good definition that you're putting out there, is like who can't say it. You know what I mean? So it's
Hmm.
like um, if a white comedian, a white male comedian can't say it, right? Which is rare. You know what I mean? Like, what can't they say? Like, and I mean that in a substantive way too, not just in a like, this makes me feel icky way. Like, or this is, whoa, can't believe you said that. Like, but they still can say it. They're still permitted to say it. There's
Hmm.
no actual penalty by
There's no
law,
repercussion.
right? Yeah, it's just like sort of like social, there is a social stigma that might come with it. There might be some backlash, but can you say it? Yes, you can say it. You know what I mean? So who can say it makes a big difference in your theory and definition here, which I think is really important to elaborate a bit because um, especially because the jokes that Chappelle made in this SNL monologue are about, and this is why I connected to it a little bit more than some of the recent stuff, is like what black men can't say. Because he was talking about Kanye and he was talking about Kyrie, and he's a black man, even though powerful, and he's like, I can't say this. Like in my industry, in my field, I can't say this. And that was most of the joke, actually. It's like, oh, you want to do that, Kanye? You can do it. I can't do that. Like, and you can find out the repercussions of you not being able to do it. But I'm gonna just accept the fact I can't, right? And so that to me was a more at home and grounded exploration for Dave Chappelle to do than about topics like gender, sex, transitions. Like, I just feel like the part of why you can't say it is you just don't be in that. You don't be in that like that.
You have no idea what you're talking about, really.
Right. You just you're out of your depth, and it's okay to be fucking. And that's why it was really dope to see some of the conversations about Kyrie Irving and the Kanye, and even the conversation we had. It was like, bro, you could be a genius at some shit. Like when it comes to the wop wop or with Dave Chappelle, like setting up smooth as eggs, like those, you're a genius at that. And you don't gotta be a genius at other shit. And even if you assign yourself a genius in the other shit, it don't mean that you have it. You know what I mean? And like that was good, because in this particular monologue, the SNL monologue, I think what was really intriguing for me was seeing him toe the line between what is a stereotype, right? And how stereotypes operate, and what becomes true because the stereotype is now so strong that even reinforcing the stereotype creates a sort of violence, it creates a sort of backlash, right? So like, let's talk about black men and big dicks, right? It's a stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
It's a stereotype. Not every black man has a big dick,
No.
right? But that stereotype, because American history is traded on it so much, like when you talk about Birth of a Nation, and like, you know, it's made us into a boogeyman. But then the other side of that, like it made us to a boogeyman that's harmful. It's a sexual stereotype that makes it so that we put pressure on ourselves to be something, and then the society puts pressure on that idea. So then the other side of it is that what is every fucking racist southern state searching on Pornhub the most every fucking day is it's big black and cuckold and every day. That's all
BBC all day,
right,
day.
Every
that
day,
and your
right?
cousin. That and your cousin.
Right. And that's the thing about the sort of the double-sided effect of a stereotype, which is, all right, you don't get to have just the negative and police and enforce about the negative part of the stereotype. And it's that there are these benefits potentially to some stereotypes. Like, okay, let's talk about right now in the Supreme Court. Have you been keeping up with the affirmative action?
Cursorily.
Yeah, so there's a white dude who has basically a case with the Supreme Court that he used like a bunch of Asian niggas. He was like, yo, I'm gonna get together a bunch of Asian parents who didn't get into like Stanford and Harvard and Yale and Princeton, because basically those schools saw that their affirmative action policies were, you know, disproportionately admitting Asian students. And those parents, because those kids didn't get to those schools, and now they got to go to, oh my God, Rice. I've got to go to MIT now. I can't go to Harvard because Harvard thought there were too many Asians.
I have to go to NYU.
Exactly. It's like, Jesus Christ, Stanford.
Dartmouth? Baltimore? Are you kidding me?
How could I look my father in the eyes? So because those parents, right, many of them privileged too, because it's not like we're talking about fresh off the boat immigrants, right?
You might be fresh off the boat. It's expensive to get on that boat.
Exactly.
You're
this white guy, who's a conservative white guy, basically created a class action with a bunch of Asian families, or majority Asian families. There's some really great reporting on it by Wasu and Jay Caspian Kang. They've talked about it over the years from an interesting perspective. And Asian, even as a side note, is a really fucking broad category. You know what I'm saying? Like, Asian is wildly broad. We're talking hundreds of countries, And I don't think there's a lot of, and this is a little guesswork, ain't a lot of like Vietnamese and Filipino niggas in this class action lawsuit. You know what I mean? It's just, that's not how it's shaken out. But the affirmative action case is such that basically the Supreme Court is going to decide whether or not affirmative action is a racially discriminatory process that needs to be overruled completely, right? Like where schools like Harvard and Duke and UNC and Princeton and Yale, all the top schools, the top 20s, will not be able to admit students on any basis that could be considered a protected class or discrimination, right? So all the protected classes, whether it's a disability, whether it's your race, whether it's your ethnicity, your religious affiliation. I bring up this case because of the stereotype of the model minority, which is that Asian folks are good at math or high achieving or get all A's, and the way that that stereotype operates is, on the one hand, you have us joking about like Dartmouth, you know, Jesus, what next, Wesleyan? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, where really, really great schools and high achievers, like, you know, there are going to be people who are upset that they didn't get into great schools because the expectation is so high. But then on the other side of it, you have Asian folks who are like, yo, I ain't never wanted to be this. Like, I never wanted to be this stereotype. I never wanted to be model anything. Now you got me setting apart from some of the other groups of people of color, like Black folks and Latino folks. Now you are asking me socially or suggesting I set myself apart sometimes along those lines. And there are a lot of Asian motherfuckers who just, I'm like, I ain't with it. I've never been about that Harvard shit or whatever, and I ain't with it. And so how these stereotypes operate, right? And I think the thing we talked about a lot in the last episode, which was really cool, was, you know, we talked a little bit about like how Jewishness in New York operates, like how we experience Jewishness in New York, and then like that versus Jewishness globally. And I think what Chappelle was trying to get at is like how Jewishness in Hollywood operates, you know, or in the entertainment industry operates. And it operates differently than on like this global level. Like when you zoom into certain environments, when you zoom into certain anecdotal experiences, Jewishness operates differently. Here's a fun fact, and a lot of people don't notice. The first leagues of basketball players, like barnstorming, people who were literally going to small towns and building up teams, it was Blacks and Jews who basically made what the NBA is. Because they wanted to play basketball, and Jews were players. You know what I mean? Like
first points in the NBA scored by a Jew.
Right, and it was like most of the players, most of the coaches were Jewish people and Black people, and actually the audience was mostly Jewish people and Black people. Like that was who was willing to go pay in some of these small venues to watch this very new sport, because they was like, yo, what is this? This seems entertaining. And the reason that they were mostly Jewish people and Black people is because Jewish people and Black people were not allowed anywhere. Like we were not allowed to do other shit. You know what I'm saying? So it was like this context, cultural context. What's that?
Baseball and football were for white people. They started to let Black people in. Okay, like, okay, fine, we'll let you in.
Right.
One by one.
Mm-hmm. Very piecemeal. And then that's the cultural context that be getting erased when we start to talk about Jewish people in this way in modern times, because of whiteness. They were like, hey, we did that for a while. Now we're white. Like now we're white. So we wasn't included. And so that put us in a position to have to deal with certain industries. Like Jews were a big part of vaudeville. Like there's just bringing up an entertainment circuit, a tour circuit, because they weren't allowed in other industries. So they were like, all right, we're going to make our own, just like Black people were doing with the Chitlin circuit, just like Black folks were doing with sports, like basketball. And so then a certain group of people among those Jewish folks were like, yeah, we would rather be white than any other thing, right? And so that kind of shapes into this argument that Chappelle is making, which is like, yo, it's so much so in the world of entertainment where I am that I don't want to assail those people. Now, funny perspective on this, and I want to hear your question. Was I was talking to Onyi. She was like, yeah, she mostly liked it. She was laughing. We were watching it together. But she was like, the one thing that she was not fucking with was when he was like, I have a lot of friends who are Jewish. Like that, I have a lot of friends. She was like, whenever someone starts out with I have a lot of friends who, it's just like, well, so what are we really saying right now? And like, I was wondering what you thought about that aspect of it, or like where Chappelle is in society.
To be honest, I don't specifically remember that thing, but in relation, okay, I don't know if this exactly lines up, but I think so. Minister Louis Farrakhan also in the last week made a statement regarding what's going on with Kanye and Kyrie, right?
Yes, definitely.
And I think what those two statements have in common, Dave Chappelle's monologue and Minister Farrakhan's, is that what they're trying to begin to do is to, and this is to something that you pointed out in the last cast that we did, is that the way that we misqualify our statements when we're talking about Jewish people is by saying that these are Jewish people, right? But there are tons of Jewish people being taken advantage of by other Jewish people, just like there are tons of Black people being taken advantage by other. It's like any group. So you're not understanding that when you're assigning them a privilege that doesn't see them accurately. That is damaging.
Yeah.
What both statements took a step to do in common is to refer to individuals. It's to get closer to going, I'm not making a statement on them. I'm talking about this person, right? And I can say that this person has a certain influence. So what I found really interesting and brave about what Minister Farrakhan said was, by referring to a certain person, he illuminated how two sides of something can be true. One is that we have this concept that Jewish people control the media, right? And that is a stereotype. And by doing that, you can trade in harm. It's not Jewish people, but there are individuals who have other individuals in their pocket. That's not. And I don't have to control the media. I have to control a couple of reporters. I have to control a couple of journalists, a couple of publicists, and they all have to have a central position, because I don't have to control the whole newspaper. I have to control the front page. If I control the front page, I control the narrative.
Right. And and you know why that's so key? Because before Kanye went off the rails with his trying to assign anecdotal individual power to an entire group of people, including my Hasidic neighbors out here who's below the poverty line. Before he got to that point, he was talking about Ari Emmanuel. Now, this is why I love having these conversations, because I get to talk about actual fucking information. And so I read a profile of Ari Emmanuel in the New Yorker. It was about 1.5 years ago. Ari Emmanuel is the brother of Rahm Emanuel, right? He's also who the character Ari Gold from Entourage is based on. So knowing that character, he's a dickhead. He is like a wild dickhead. And the article is just basically yo, this nigga's a dickhead. And he's making dickhead moves, but to the point where you're like, damn, can you be this much of a dickhead and betray mad people and actually still have power? Or does it all kind of fall in on you when you betray mad people, right? It was kind of like a Trumpian thing. They didn't liken him to Trump. I think they even mentioned Trump a little bit in the article because of some of the dealings that Trump has had with different people, where he's basically hung them out to dry on a bad deal. And so Ari Emanuel is a very similar kind of figure where, looked at through one lens, you might say, oh, this guy's smart and savvy and he made exits where he needed to, and got the advantage, right? But then on the other hand, he insulted a lot of people. He tried to have people blackballed and kept out of certain industries. He threatened or extorted or try to leverage other people out, like including partners, like literal best friends for like 20 plus years type people, where it'd be like, okay, if there's an opportunity to double cross my best friend to have the biggest agency in Hollywood, I will do it. Like where it was like, I will definitely do that. But then he also started to become known as the guy who would definitely do that, right? Which is a very isolating fucking thing, right? It's an isolating thing. So when you think about characters like Emmanuel, who's Jewish, right? You think about like him and some of his actions playing to that stereotype, because he's the person who published an op-ed in the Financial Times, boycott Kanye. He was like, this is the time where we have to say intolerance, these sorts of things, boycott Kanye. And he has many individual interests in Hollywood that have to do with making sure that he is a person who decides, who gatekeeps, who decides who is powerful, who decides what names have honor, which names have shame, etc. Even while he has all this dirt on his name, right? And so an individual like that is a really he's a really key figure in some of these really nefarious stereotypes, right? But then when I think about like Minister Farrakhan and what he was doing, and talking about the head of ADL and where ADL's interests may lie, etc., I was like, yeah, I think part of what they're getting at, what Chappelle is getting at, and part of what Farrakhan is getting at is how come Black people always get fucked over by this kind of person in power, and that adds up to us feeling left out and grievous. You know what I'm saying? Like, because there are Black people who are like that. There are Puffies of the world. You know what I mean? There are. It's not, and you can't. Puffy ain't Jewish.
Eazy-E. There's lots.
Right. There are motherfuckers like that, and it's just like, well, then how come y'all got to rally and be white and do that to us over and over and over again? Which I think is a valid question. Like, and how does your heritage, your cultural or ethnic heritage excuse you? And I'm just talking about the people like Emmanuel. How does that excuse you from critique? That's why I really loved the New Yorker article, because it really painted Emmanuel as like a dirtbag. It's like, this dude is like a grade A dirtbag. Like and to the point where, so the article, the premise was, Endeavor, it was first known as WME, a huge agency. Agency. He basically once turned that into, instead of an agency for the biggest talent where he had this huge monopoly, and literally like it was up against Congress to decide whether or not it was a monopoly, because that's how much power they had, right? Which is like, that's an unfair amount of power. When people have an unfair amount of power, we have checks and balances to try to sort out whether that is true and whether that should be broken up. So there are some certain people who also happen to be Jewish who have an unfair amount of power, and it's on the record, right? So he had William Morris Endeavor. He was changing into Endeavor, period. Endeavor was going to be not just a talent agency, but now we're making huge movies, we're publishing books, like now we're a huge media player, and we have a monopoly on the talent, which again is like a super monopoly, right? And the article is about how that badly failed. You know what I mean? And that's the other thing about stereotypes, because he wanted to take that public. He wanted to take it out on the market. He had an IPO. Basically, he drummed up a lot of fucking momentum for the IPO of Endeavor. And when people looked under the hood, they were like, what the fuck are y'all making? Y'all not making shit. Like, you're not Universal Studios. They have a century's worth of experience making content. You're not William Morris anymore, where you have a clear and focused. So what are y'all doing? What are you trying to do other than just have a lot of power in the market of entertainment? And once the analysts pulled the hood back, it tanked their value, and they weren't able to go public. And Emmanuel was a huge failure, right? A huge failure in trying to amass that kind of power. But it's just like, we got to tell those stories too. We have to tell where they failed, why our society even has systems to make sure that people don't have monopolies like that. Not to say that those systems are fucking effective, but that we are aiming to do that, and that even this guy who's super powerful and who also happens to be Jewish failed.
So there's two interesting, and I'll send you these two. I saw on Dan Lebertard's podcast.
Oh, I have the clip.
Right?
The clip.
So there's
Yo,
that.
you want me to put it on screen?
Sure.
I got the clip. I'm because I literally, that was the main thing I wanted to kick off with. I'm so glad you brought that up. All right, I'm gonna switch to that screen real quick.
And just so I don't forget, remind me to also come to Rabbi Harry Rosenberg's response this week as well.
Okay, that's dope. I want to see that. All right, so I'm about to play the clip. Let me see if I can get the good volume. All right, so it's Dan Lebertard and this me and El Hassan, who I ran into in LA once when I was working for BET, but we'll talk about that later. Make sure, tell me if you can hear it too.
Okay.
Hold on. At the top of your craft?
I love that you said that, because the joke was you get a group of black people, it's a gang.
It was a funny joke.
It's a group of Italians, it's a mob. You get a group of Jewish people, and it's
a conspiracy, and we can't talk about it.
It's a coincidence, and we shouldn't talk about it, right? So the implication when people say, "Oh, that's an anti-Semitic joke," is that, yeah, also groups of black people are gangs, and groups of Italians are the mob. All three of those things are examples of stereotypes that people barter on that aren't true. But the only part that people found to be offensive was the part where referring to the Jewish community. That to me is the genius, is to make you jump up and say, I object to that joke.
It's a good joke.
And I object to that joke because of that line, that punchline right there. But I don't object to the setup.
Yeah,
What's the lion stat, Mike?
It's a good joke. Nazis didn't march in Charlottesville.
All right, so I think that was the point. That was the piece. That
it is kind of important, the next thing he's going to say, right? Because what he's going to say is essentially that Dave Chappelle statement opens up the harm.
It's like yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, and I should play it. I'm not going to play it.
Please
my
do.
dude.
Please do.
I'll play it.
And threaten violence against
I asked
Italian
for lions,
people.
not Nazis.
You know what I mean? Like that, the objection that people have is like right now at this moment is a very dangerous time. There are active threats against synagogues across America.
Absolutely.
There are no active threats against groups of Italian people.
Are there any active threats against groups of black people? Because I kind of feel like 400 plus years of that has been happening. And I think that's a lot of, again, the kernel of where a lot of this stand-up is coming from for Chappelle. It's like, even when you talk about his jokes around the trans community, it's the idea that in this country, people will be up in arms about all sorts of worthy causes about prejudices other than black people. Like, well, black people, that's just the way it is.
But this
look, there are threats on synagogues. Absolutely. There's also a threat every time there's a cop behind me, Mike.
Okay. So there's a because the point about affirmative action says, well, that's not true though. That we have protections. We do care about Black people's discrimination as well.
Yeah.
So and that's valid. But I think the point he's making is that so because Jewish people are endangered by Nazis, that means that as a Black person, I can't refer to my own personal experience. Why do I become responsible for how they did? If a person who intends to do harm to Jewish people doesn't need Dave Chappelle's qualification.
Yeah, they will try to do that harm regardless. Like that.
So now Dave Chappelle doesn't have the right to speak on true things because of that? Well, how does that work? And
Yeah.
now here's the real point, because Rabbi Harry Rosenberg this week referred to the fact that the
Do you have
the
a
nation
link?
of sure, I will. Let me find it first. And because we're not live, right?
No, we're not live. Yeah, and
So,
I
yeah.
mean, I don't even care uploading it as such. Like, you know, niggas
So-
having a conversation. Like, that's literally what's happening. So,
Is it Twitter? I'll go to my TikTok first. See if it's in here.
no, that's super important. I'm glad you brought this up because
wait.
that is where let me just speak a little bit too on Amin Hassan on Dan Le Batard and Stu Gatz. I think that the great part about what Amin is saying, so there's this theory that I was talking about with Cav when we had our conversation. Unfortunately, I didn't get to record that the right way, but there's a theory called Afro-pessimism, right? And Ta-Nehisi Coates, great writer, author, he's one of the first people to really make it popular or like put it in the popular imagination. Frank Wilderson is the person who founded it. He's a Black writer and theorist. And what Afro-pessimism states is that anti-Blackness is so prevalent that every conversation we have like this still will include anti-Blackness. So even if we start to talk about things like the Oppression Olympics or the plight of Jewish folks, it has to be seen through a lens of the fact that the world is anti-Black. Like, there's no time, like Amin Hassan is saying, there's no time where I'm not under threat, including times when other groups are under threat. There's no time when, and that's the other thing where I just wish Dave had been closer to the issue of transness when he started his stuff, because it's like there's no time when Black trans women are not under threat. And that is something I think he could understand. Like, I think he could terrifically understand that. But Black trans women were nowhere in those routines. He was talking about, and we're talking about Caitlyn Jenner, he was talking about the white trans experience, which makes me think that is what he's mostly focused on, but still not precise enough to say. So that was kind of like, that was a little tricky for me. But I think what Amin Hassan is saying is like, hey, I'm taking that, and it's weird because I don't know how much people will assign it this label, but he's almost like, I'm taking an Afro-pessimist point of view, which is that I have to think about it this way because my experience is that we are always downgraded, degraded, excluded, ill-considered, and that doesn't stop just because another group is, right? And that also is what makes, I think, sometimes, I'm not saying this to Chappelle and Amin Hassan, but I think sometimes, this is my analyst bird's eye point of view, we stop seeing what's happening to Black Jews or Black trans people when we get far into the I'm under threat part of being a Black man. I think sometimes that happens so loudly that then those groups are like, well, fuck, like, I'm over here a Black Jew. Like, what you got for me? Like help me out. Like, and I think that is where.
But isn't that Kyrie's point? But isn't that Kyrie's point?
I think with Kyrie, I don't know his point.
Because
you know what I mean?
Remember, he didn't say a ton.
I want to generously infer that, but I just don't know.
Okay, so exactly. We don't know on either side, but why is our presumption that what he is saying is
that's
what
anti-Black.
Nazis are saying?
That's anti-Blackness.
Why does that?
That is anti-Blackness.
So
villainizing him.
Can you play Rabbi Rosenberg's clip?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it up. I see it right here. Pull it up on the screen. See, people not getting into it like the Neal Riggers podcast is getting into it. That's the
Kyrie
thing.
Irving.
They're not really going. They're not going to get into it in the same way.
Hold on.
Run it back to the top.
The book that Kyrie Irving is promoting. You've had conversations with that author.
Many.
You're very involved with Amari Stoudemire. I think you helped him through the conversion process.
He hadn't helped himself, but I was just a study partner because along the way.
You're very involved in the community.
You are in this space that a lot of people, when it comes up, is like,
Yeah, and shut it down. Anti-Semitism, we can't hear it.
So I've been in this space because I've been debating the people who are hateful towards Jewish people. I found it to be very easy to discredit their logic that they're promoting. They're coming with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where there's like a clash.
So can you explain the claims and
Yes,
context?
the real elephant in the room is if you go to the government of Israel's website on their view on the lost tribes of Israel, who's from the house of Israel around the world, you notice one of the most common names in that report is the Igbo tribe, the Igbo tribe. 40 or so million people in Nigeria that self-identify as being Jewish. There's, 60 Orthodox communities in there who've converted and are practicing Judaism. They have a whole Jewish revival going there. It's fascinating, and the government of Israel is loving it, and they're supporting it, and Jewish people are making documentaries about it. And it's like the most exciting thing ever. So anytime I'm in Israel at like the Western Wall and I see a Igbo man, I could tell because they're wearing Nigerian outfits. I say, are you Jewish? He's like, yeah, how do you know? And I'm like, well, bring it in, give me a hug. But what is mind-boggling to me, which I can't imagine why this is not in the news and not spoken about, is that like a large chunk, more than a fourth of the transatlantic slave trade came specifically from this one tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So how are we not starting to connect dots and being like, wait a minute. So the tribe in Africa that the government of Israel is fascinated with and, enamored by is now the blood of those people flowing through the African-American community here. It makes sense to me why they're all being like, we have an Israelite affinity, where if the DNA of the blood of these people are in them, they have a valid claim to feel and say that. Where it goes wrong then is where spiritual bullies come and hijack that reality into forming cults that create hate, and etc. So those are the people I battle. I'm not battling the reality that you could be from the house of Israel. I'm battling the bullies that are standing in between you and your inheritance, which is the Torah. Because if you really are from the house of Israel, come back towards the Torah. It's perfectly been preserved throughout the exile.
The book that Kyrie Irving.
So now,
Now
why can he
that-
say that? Was that anti-Semitic? Did he endanger Jews?
Absolutely fucking not. Here's what I would say. Kyrie ain't talking about what Harry Rosenberg was talking about. He talking about them boys with the robes. And I'm gonna say why that's difficult and different.
No, hold on. Let me stop you one. That's not true. Because one of the person he's talking about debating is Ronald Dalton Jr. Ronald Dalton Jr. is the writer of the book that became that movie. Ronald Dalton Jr. wrote Hebrews to Negroes.
Right.
The information is based upon that what Ronald Dalton's research, and he's referring to the Igbo.
Right. So I agree with that factual part of it, but I stand on the side of like what Shannon Sharp has said, which is that we can claim accurately and factually that we're part of the tribe of Israel without denouncing and trouncing others who come through that tribe, right? And I think that's where that film is in a really weird territory, right? Like, it's like, in order for Black people to process the dislocation we've experienced, the displacement, in order for Black people to find our heritage after, like, post-transatlantic slave trade, in order for us to do that, we've had to come to emotional terms with a harm done. And a lot of times when coming to emotional terms with a harm done is so difficult that people gravitate toward like these sort of like nationalist ethnocentric perspectives. And I think what a lot of the Black Jews that I've been hearing from, a lot of what Harry Rosenberg is saying in that clip, I'm so glad you found that. It was a brilliant clip. But I think what they're saying is ethnocentrism shouldn't be a qualifier for any side. It shouldn't be, and the Hasidic folks who are racist, and the Hasidic folks who are progressive and not racist and roll with the Black Jews over here, like they're going to have clashes over that too, because there are ethnocentric folks in each of our groups, and that ethnocentrism is the shit that's not helping. So if you're bringing in ethnocentrism, and look, I do agree with you though that the anti-Black and overreacting to Kyrie's point of view is a very it's evidence of the fact that, damn, we can't, because of our blackness, we can't even have the fucking discussion.
We can't
Right.
talk about what's potentially our own experience. We can't even know if it is our own experience, because in investigating it, we're shut down in the investigation by someone, not Harry Rosenberg, but someone stands in the way of us trying to investigate this possibility, even though it's realistic.
That is the someone I want to talk about. So Dave Chappelle's very loaded joke at the end of his monologue, I think was the best part. So one could read it as, is he flirting with this type of anti-Semitism by saying the they at the end, because he says whoever they are. That's how he ends it. Brilliant fucking stuff, right? Whoever they are. Now, I want to believe that what Dave is talking about is an elite class, right? The reason why it's hard for me with him is just because of his own history. His own history looking for proximity to elites. That's the same reason why it makes Kanye hard to believe. Kyrie, on the other hand, I don't have that same doubt about him. I'm not skeptical about. I don't think
his curiosity.
Yeah, Kyrie Irving
silly, but
very much recognizes himself as a $40 million slave. Like, he sees himself as that. And he is. He's not a part of the power structure in the way that, and even Chappelle as an entertainer, he's not a part of the power structure, right? And so he understands that, but he does strive to be a part of it. Kanye understands that he's not part of the power structure, but he does strive to be a part of it. As frog hair close as he can to it, right?
He's in love with it, which is why he's compromised.
Right, exactly, right? And so I don't think that Kyrie is there. And I don't think that putting him in this position helps him to come to an understanding with the points of view of people like Harry Rosenberg. I think putting him in this position emotionally, how do people feel when their backs are against the wall? Like, no one responds well. And this is not talking about the fourth quarter against Golden State in 2016. Like, this is not that. You know, this is like, yo, he has to walk down the streets in Brooklyn, you know, with the large belief among a lot of people that he is anti-Semitic. But then even as harmful as that, with a large belief among Black people and Black men, like, oh, he did something, he said something about them, and they so biased against us that now we got to ride for him against them.
So we're creating, this is how we all as a group get leverage to that smaller group, because otherwise you're isolated.
See,
I can either be by myself.
This is the type of shit that's going. This is the type of shit that's going to get this video taken down, and we're going to disappear. We're going to literally disappear. Like, we calling out Diddy, we're calling out the elites. Like,
but this is my point. I've said this a long time ago, Drew, and it's like I really want to write this movie eventually. Like, the idea that there's one person who like benefits the most. There's one person who gets the most benefit from all this.
It's like Underdog Brother.
And who are they? Who is this person? We all point fingers at each other. We're like, it's you, it's my representative. Oh, where does it go? Where does it go? Right? Like, I'm the type of person, regardless of how you feel about it, anytime I'm trying to figure something out, I follow the money. I just follow the money. You follow them. And there's certain ways in which it becomes very hard to follow the money, right? There's certain things you can use that make it like a trust, right? Once it gets there, you don't know who owns what. You don't know. So we talk about the people who we think are very rich and all that, but we know what they have. Then there's just, and I think these discussions are trying to go, hey, but what's that? What's there? But there is something there, and there are people who benefit from it. And if I can't talk about it, why? Because it's a known fact.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, you know, here are the things, right? Where I think between me and you, we know the why. Because motherfuckers might not watch this conversation, or they might, you know. We know the why. And I think the rules of engagement about a discussion about like this, I think we both also intrinsically understand the rules of engagement too, right? And I think what a person like what an iconoclast like a Kyrie Irving does, or Dave Chappelle or Kanye West, what they do is they say, "Hey, my job and my role in society is to throw out all the rules. Like I'm not even about that because it's not going to get to the core thing that I'm trying to get to." And I think there's merit in that, just like I think there's merit in understanding the rules of engagement and still being able to pick them apart and subvert them and, you know, go under and around them. And I think what happens when you toss out the rules of engagement and you're in a historically oppressed group, then you don't get to engage, unfortunately. That's why Harry Rosenberg could say that on TikTok, because he is still white. He still appears white, and that whiteness is a protection of, hey, I'm not necessarily going to come in at the angle that a black person needs to come in. I can come in at this angle of like, hey, let me just like give you some straight up information here. It's more trustworthy, and that just all is coming from how he appears, right? Because of anti-blackness, because of the effect of the transatlantic slave trade, that comes into his view. And you hope that a person like that in his clip continues to do that responsibly, because actually we need him to. Now, my other hope, because I can only really speak for the folks that we find relevant in these discussions, and the folks that we find relevant in these discussions often aren't, or how about this? The most visible folks that we find relevant, like a Kyrie Irving in these discussions, aren't often the most informed, because the ways that we've been, just the same way that Jews were excluded from many industries and went into the entertainment industry, we've been excluded from many industries and went to the entertainment industry. So then what does that make niggas good at? Entertaining. You know, it makes them good at provoking and riling people too. And that is a very different thing than being like, we got to examine a lot of different facts here. Like, that's a different thing. Like, it's a starter. That's what they do. They have great starter energy. Like, okay, everybody's all worked up. Now what? Now what's the relevant information? They're like, Kyrie's like, no.
But
not sure.
So also, just so you know, my computer might turn off, and then I'm just going to switch to my phone. Okay. Now, so when Kanye says George Bush doesn't care about black people, though, right? That's that same thing. That's that same message just here. But what we do is we fill in the information for him. We go, yeah, no, he's not wrong. Here, I've been doing the work on this, and I'll show you this part. I'll do, because it's not their individual responsibility to have the entire answer. Nobody but there's a cultural support system that builds out, like, no, this is a valid perspective that we have, right? Now, this is just, we agreed. When we don't agree, now he's isolated to try to make a point all by himself, right? And that's a part of what they're pointing to, how that there's a solidarity in messaging and support and an ability to say something, right? Because you can say that the reason Rabbi Rosenberg has the right to say that isn't because he's white, it's because he's Jewish. But again, that is also, at least, I won't say Kyrie, but that's Ronald Dalton's point. But so am I. So am I. So why do you invalidate my Jewishness? Why do I have to prove something to you? What is it?
I would say that Harry Rosenberg also touches on this, which is, like he says, through the Torah, right? So if Kyrie were coming from a place of, because I think that's where the ethnocentrism point comes in, because like saying I'm from the bloodline of a people is not the same as saying as I practice and observe the customs and the cultural heritage of that people that make me part of a religious group that actually earns me some of that solidarity too. You know what I mean? Like, so I think if Kanye and Kyrie were willing to, and we talked about this in the last episode, not as a proving ground, but it's like, if you are saying I am a Jew, you must also know what that means. It is not the same as saying I am black because of my skin. And also, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. There's motherfuckers who are black because of their skin. And to me, I do not hold any solidarity for them because
we're not sure that Carrie Lake ain't black.
Right.
I saw some pictures today where I was like, whoa, hold on. Hold on. I thought it was just absurd. I mean, Rachel Dolezal. Now you tripping. Carrie Lay, what's going on here? What is going on here? This is interesting.
That's so real, though. That's so real because, phenotype and ethnography, it's a dicey game. It's a much dicier game than me and you being able to share a cultural experience that we say, not only does it give us solidarity through these cultural experiences, also we're going to take up for other people who had this experience and make sure they're protected and that they're in this world, that they can move with a certain amount of freedom that they might not otherwise have, which is a different thing, right? Than being like, well, I'm just this thing, right? And that's what makes me the authority, because the people who are like, well, I'm Black and that makes me the authority are usually put out there to serve white talking points, to serve oppressive talking points. Well, I'm Black, so I can say white lives matter. I can say all lives matter. I'm Black. I'm Black. I can say that Black people commit crimes because we do. I'm Black. There's always those people who get to be put on Front Street with the ethnocentric and the bigoted points of view. And that's what is happening with Kyrie and Kanye. Well, I'm Jewish, so I can say this super harmful thing about you, all Jews, like that do not have even close to the experience of. And that's where it gets really, really tricky and dicey. I actually have something after this at 3:30 my time, 12:30 your time. So I'm hoping that your computer can keep going. But this has been such a great discussion that I'm almost like, I want you to put a bow on your shit and we like take this because it's actually been fire.
Yo, I mean, we kind of the bow, the videos actually provided the bows, man. Like, yeah, it's just like it's like here, like just look at it, fam. Like, all right, and this is the difference between what we're doing and what they're doing, right? It's like, where's your references? Where's your references points?
Cite it, like I'd be saying, cite it.
Where's your citations, bro? And I got my citations, bro. I've been taking this seriously. For over a decade, I've been taking this seriously.
You don't got to go to college because you could be a college dropout or whatever, but cite it. You know what I mean? Like, this is where Kyrie and Kanye are putting out there, like, it might be useful for some people to go to school. Like, it's like some people, if they not going to be thorough, like, learn about footnotes, my nigga. Like, that's cool. Like, do that. Like, Steph graduated, Kyrie. Like, he got the and then he went back to Davidson and was like, yo, let me actually find out some more shit. Because Steph was out here talking about wild shit too for a minute, and that got forgotten because he hasn't been on that shit for a minute. But I think it's important that you're right, that we offer some context, that we offer support to the different points of view, because the point of view that Kyrie Irving was so wild out of pocket that Dave Chappelle could be considered out of pocket for some of the things he said, that point of view is one that needs to be informed by Afro-pessimism and needs to be informed by anti-Blackness, because otherwise Black folks are not going to feel like we have any country in this discussion.
It's and that's Dave's fundamental point. It's like, so what? Like, when can we say what? And Non's, it's like, when can we say what about our own experience then?
Yeah.
And when I'm referring to myself, at least, right? And my experience with a Jewish person or an Asian person or a white person, right? Like, when can I refer? And I'm not going to pretend that being oppressed doesn't look the same. It's like, this is familiar to me as oppression. This is, and I have to be able to refer to that. If you, the fact that you feel threatened is not my responsibility to not be able to express my individual, because I also feel threatened. Right? It's the same thing as trans. Just because Dave Chappelle feels threatened as a Black man doesn't mean he gets to invalidate the fact that, yes, but trans Black people also feel threatened. So you don't get to own the conversation about whose threat is more real and who gets to say what about those threats.
Exactly that. And where we get to a place of empathy and understanding, or at least acceptance, right? It could be begrudging acceptance. It could be is when we get to lay out all these stories and say, oh, okay, I could see that. I could see what this Evo thing. I understand that. Or okay, I could see that where you feel like the birthright and the customs that you've learned and gone through. I could see that, and then get to that point where it's like, can you not negate something about me for you to have you? Like, as long as we can be respectful in that way, dope. Like, that's great. But if you need to negate something about me, especially if it's something about me that's not saying, yo, you're whack, like those are terms of a discussion I'm never going to engage with, right? Like, if something about you needs to say I'm whack.
Because I don't invalidate you, right? In that scenario, what he's saying is that Dave Chappelle shouldn't say what he's saying because Nazis invalidate Jews. But he's like, what? So now I'm responsible for the way Nazis invalidate you. How does that? It doesn't. It's just, and that is it's the same thing. It's like so I have to do the emotional homework of white people. Of white people, oppressive white people, I now have to do their emotional homework. I'm responsible for making you safe by not saying
we're doing their classwork and their homework. We're doing their classwork and their homework already. Because even in that discussion with Amin Al-Hassan, he's saying, I'm doing the classwork and the homework of showing you that my point of view gets excluded all the time. Like, I have to even bring that up in this discussion because y'all haven't.
Because you won't see it. Otherwise, you would literally talk about the threats on Jewish people to a black man. You're a Jewish man looking at a black man and tell it's like what it's like okay, if I don't say this to you, you apparently won't see it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like if that same room were tasked with talking about women, who would be the person in that room to say, oh yeah, there is a specific threat on women that we haven't brought up here? Or, who in that room could say, oh, there's a specific threat on women that I might have a blind spot about? They're not even willing to go that far. They're not even willing to say, hey, I might have a fucking blind spot. They're immediately jumping to, well, I hear what you're saying, but we got to be careful about what you're saying and not say it. It's like, how is that?
And who's doing that to them? And who's doing that to them?
No one ever. No one ever. Like, that original question.
That ain't interesting.
That original question I asked you, bro, of who can't say. You know what I mean?
What can Dan Levy not say? I'm so happy I had that in the holster. Like, because he can say it, right? I'm not saying it. Look, he's saying it. He's got his young girl on and everything, and he's saying it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great point. That's an excellent clip. This has been the Neal Riggers podcast. I love talking it out. Love you, bro.
Love you
this
too,
is
man.
Amazing fucking piece of work. And your computer lasted the whole way.
It did, and it's like on 4% right now.
Nah, we got this. You know what I mean? At the buzzer.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? All right, I'm
cash right in Steph's face.